Welcome to our continuing conversation on erasing shame. My name is DJ Chuang. I'm continuing my conversation with Jenn Suen Chen, who is a spiritual director, Enneagram coach, international speaker, and author. But today we're talking about the spiritual formation and the 4 stages that she has developed a pretty clear and helpful paradigm for the stages of our faith journey that we go through. So I'm going to review stage 1, shaping, and then we're also going to talk about undoing. Jenn, thanks for joining me and continue this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me, DJ.
Now, we're both going to participate in this conversation and share a bit of our own spiritual formation, and you can direct the conversation as we go. But let's go back and talk about shaping. What is that shaping stage? And then I guess I'll share first, and then you can share a bit of your own story when one or two of the times that you've been in that stage of your life.
Yeah, great. Just to recap, these stages are not linear. I think this cyclical invitational pilgrimage journey that we're on with God is what we're talking about is our spiritual journeys, but how our spiritual journeys impact us in every way, our emotional, mental, and physical being. So that shaping piece, I think, as I was thinking about just how did I get here? What made me who I am? What were those pieces that were really key to how I got to this place? And I think asking those questions of what parental figures, because it's not always parents, biological parents, it's adult figures in our lives, but adults play a big part of a child's upbringing and a child's growing up, for better or for worse. And our cultural upbringing, being Asian American, Chinese American, my being a daughter of immigrants, those pieces are part of a shaping. And then coming to faith, if we came to faith as a young child, or if we came to faith as in our adult years, those our family of origin impacts the way we understand who God is, and our theology emerges out of our church teaching and our understanding of truth and grace and love and the Father and all of those big pieces that make up our faith. And I think also just the shaping pieces are, how did we learn to cope with pain? What did we learn about emotions, and how did we deal with it? And what were some ways in which we then either went into hiding or we began to mask, because we all give to get, so we give something to get something back. And so I think it's pausing long enough to say, what were those shaping experiences for me, key experiences? We won't remember all of our story, and I don't think it's essential that we do. But I think when we invite God in, we say, God, would you bring to mind what's important for me to remember about those moments, especially when it pertains to God and ourselves. So that's kind of that shaping stage or seasons that I'm talking about.
Okay, so you're the director, and I'll be the, what do you call the other person?
The directee.
The directee. Okay, so let's do it. How would you ask the question, and then I'll open up and recall the places where God has shaped me.
Well, tell me about how you came to know God.
Well, I grew up in a traditional Chinese family. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, and we didn't have a lot of religious value in the family. Just very practical people. We came to the U.S. when I was 8, and my parents ran a motel business. But about 6 months into running the motel, a used car salesman came by and invited the 3 kids, three boys in our family, and invited us to go to church, to go to Sunday school, actually. And my dad, being a person of strong value, he's a virtuous man, but
Mhm.
not religious, uh, allowed us and encouraged us to go to get good moral formation.
Mhm.
And so we went to Sunday school almost every week. A retired school teacher and his wife and marathon runner would come by and pick us up every week, and we had exposure to the Bible.
Mhm.
But my dad warned us to not sign any papers or become members or become baptized, because his greatest fear was that would uh, we would lose our money, just to put it
Mm.
bluntly. He didn't want us
Mhm.
to be tithing or commit to church when we had other responsibilities in life.
Mhm. Mhm.
But my moment of faith, I look back to being a senior in high school when we had a truck driver staying at our motel. And before he left, he shared the simple gospel from John 3:16 and
Mm.
invited us to pray to receive Christ. And I sincerely prayed at that time, wanting Christ in my life, because I thought to myself, life had to be more than just fulfilling responsibilities,
Mm.
going to school, getting a college degree, getting a job, getting a wife, getting a house, getting a family, and repeat the cycle. So,
Mm.
from what I knew of the Bible, and what I wanted from God was a life of meaning and
Mm.
purpose and something more than just mere existence. So I think that's how my journey began.
Mm.
But even in my early years of discipleship or growing with Christ, as the oldest son of a Chinese family, I was
Mhm.
very much responsibility and duty bound,
Mhm.
shaped from my family and just shaped from my birth order.
Mhm.
And so, and we'll get to the undoing part. So that
Mm.
only held up through seminary, but it
Mm.
was started unraveling after seminary. But that started my journey.
Yeah.
That's how I got introduced to God.
Mm.
It gave me some strong values,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it didn't fit me.
Mm.
I couldn't work hard enough to fulfill all the duties I think God expected of me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say there has to be more. So there was already a stirring in your soul as a young man. The questions, there's got to be more to this life. And yet, um, the family responsibilities, what you felt, whether perceived or real, they're
Mhm.
sometimes so hard to to separate. And then what you're learning about God is that He needs and wants stuff from us too.
Mm,
So now we're bound.
mm,
We're bound to a life of honor and following after God, but also honoring our family, right?
yes.
And
Mhm.
fulfilling those what can feel like almost crushing responsibilities at times, depending
Yes.
upon the needs of our family. So you
Yes.
named it. You named so many
Mhm.
different dynamics as an oldest son, immigrant. Parents were hardworking, virtuous,
Mhm.
non-religious, and yet you have these outside figures, a used car salesman and a truck driver who introduce you to Jesus. And God uses that too,
Mhm.
to in your shaping journey, these adults who saw you.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and that retired school teacher. I think of you named some key people. And I think the question I would follow up with is um, what got you into seminary? What got you into, what made you want to go into ministry?
Well, that was still shaped by my impetus to duty, that
Mm.
because I'm a follower of Christ, um, I wanted to show more of my commitment.
Mhm.
and be a responsible Christian, not merely being an engineer. I studied computer engineering at Virginia Tech.
Mhm.
Um, I had a girlfriend at the time and didn't feel fulfilled there because
Mhm.
I was trying to please God. And
Mm.
so I went to seminary, kind of a leap of faith that
Mm.
maybe God could use me to reach my peers in college. And the few times I've had exposure to Chinese churches, that just didn't seem relevant to me. And I thought, well,
Mhm.
maybe God could use me to do something different that would reach the next generation.
Hmm.
Although I had no clue how to do that.
Yeah.
So I thought seminary would give me the tools and the training to do that. My
Mhm.
my 2 years after college was in a small white Bible church from a
Mm.
Plymouth Brethren background. And so it just gave me a hunger
Okay.
for the word. And so I wanted to
Mm.
learn more about the Bible and find a way to teach it to my peers,
Mm.
even though I wasn't around them. So it was an aspiration.
Yeah.
And the verse that came to me multiple times that summer was, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." And so, because at age 25, I was, well, unencumbered and I was free to go. So I went and
Mm.
had some confirmation. A retired Navy senior chief discipled me for 2 years, and he kind
Mm.
of became a father figure. And when I shared this sense of calling, he confirmed, he was one of the signs of confirmation for me that he had been praying that God would show me this direction for over a year.
Mm.
And the second thing that took as a sign was that my father wouldn't disown me, because I
That's
wasn't sure how
important.
that would affect.
Yeah.
I couldn't take that.
Absolutely. That's real. DJ, that's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with those two signs, I packed up my car and drove from
Mm.
Maryland to Dallas, endured 4.5 years, having doubt every year because I was timid. I
Mm.
was not a confident person. I didn't have a
Mhm.
clear calling. But what little
Mm.
seed I had was, I want to do something that would change Chinese culture.
Mm.
Didn't know
Yeah.
how or
Yeah.
what gifts I had to offer to that, but
Mm.
you know, 30 years later, that's become clear. But
Yeah.
it took that long.
Yeah. It does, doesn't it? And I love that even those longings and desires and
Mm,
the ways that you bear God's image. Um, yeah, it's a beautiful thing, DJ, just hearing you share that. Thank you.
mm, thank you.
Yeah, God doesn't waste anything. Even those little desires that we wonder, are they important? Or, oh, that felt like childish. But no, yeah, the personalities we've been given and um, maybe those longings that we put in a closet. Even at 25, you had a desire to reach the next generation. That's
Hmm.
wonderful.
Hmm.
Yeah, and look at you now. You're
Yeah,
still
I
doing
mean,
it.
that's all I had to go on, and seminary was particularly challenging because I'm not your stereotypical type A alpha male, but seminary was filled with them. And so
Yeah,
people came into seminary with an agenda, with a vision,
yeah,
with a direction. They knew what they were going to do, and I had no clue
yeah.
except little seeds of faith. And
Mm.
um, through some encouragement in the midst of despair and doubt and wanting to quit, I made it through.
Mm.
And then God brought me my wife. So I graduated Saturday and got married the next day, Sunday. And then Rochelle and I, my wife, went on this faith adventure for the next 27 years to today.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then God shaped me in other ways, painfully and
Mm.
different ways. Since
Mhm.
then. I'm not sure we're going to cover all of those seasons of shaping, but that was the
Mhm.
first one.
Mhm. Yeah.
That was the first one.
And those are really important shaping moments. I think even if we just um, even had more time, it would be just taking apart those early childhood moments, older brother to two younger brothers. What was that like holding, caring for them and bearing responsibility and going to church at just three boys going to church with someone. Um, yeah, all of those moments are not to be overlooked. And I think we don't look back enough. We're not reflective enough in general, I think. And it feels, I've heard, different people say to me, it feels, you know, too introspective. What benefit would that give me?
Mm,
But even hearing you share your story, just even these few minutes, um, it makes me think of my own. And oh, there was another person I forgot along the way who was important. And just
mm,
as we share story, I think we bear witness to the grace of God in our lives. And we testify. I think that word testimony has maybe lost its
yes.
feels, but it's still very important to
Hmm.
share our story, our testimony
Hmm.
of how we of all the parts, not just the good parts,
Hmm.
which leads us to that next season, which we can talk about in a minute. So yeah,
Yes, and yeah, I mean, when we look at the Bible from this framework, the Bible is filled with stories of people going through these stages of spiritual
yeah,
formation. And
absolutely.
actually, a lot of it is messy. I know
It's
in the
very
Sunday school
messy.
class, we tend to put the Bible characters on a pedestal, but actually,
Hmm.
most of those Bible characters that we put on the flannel graph had very messy lives.
Yeah,
Abraham with
yeah,
Hagar, Abraham with
yes,
lying, Abraham
yes,
doubting God, Jacob wrestling
yes,
God, so on, so on, and so on.
yeah.
And yet, through all those apparent failures, God still was faithful and he was still
Hmm.
doing amazing things through all of that,
Yes,
culminating in the Messiah. Now,
yes,
given the time we have, so let's introduce the second stage about
yeah.
undoing, and then we'll
Hmm.
take it to the next season of my life when I experience undoing.
Yeah. So, yeah, and doing, as we were emailing back and forth, and you said it doesn't
Hmm.
sound very comfortable, and
Hmm.
it's not, but it is a necessary part of our formation. And God uses these seasons of undoing to reveal things about ourselves, but not in a, I think sometimes, I don't know, depending on how we see God, we can see the darkness and pain as punitive. And we can say, what did I do to deserve this? It doesn't feel right. And you're right, it doesn't feel right. And it feels so counterintuitive to lean in to darkness or to lean into the pain. Um, but I think these undoing moments are just more descriptors of what has happened to us because and maybe it's a way of understanding our lives. There's been seasons in all of our lives where we have encountered darkness, where we bumped up against a metaphorical wall and we couldn't think ourselves out of it. We couldn't rally ourselves. We couldn't try harder. We couldn't add one more discipline or fast long enough to be able to get ourselves back up on our feet. And I think the way we have been explained the gospel or even our faith is that we're supposed to figure it out and we just memorize more scripture and read more and
Hmm.
do more, but it's all about our
Hmm.
doing as opposed to just leaning in and hearing what he's whispering, hearing what he's inviting us to. um, that facing the darkness, while it's not a natural response, scripture says that even that the darkness is not dark to God, and
mm,
that he finds us in the dark. He can still
mm,
see us in the darkness. And so to listen and to hear what God is saying to me in those spaces, in my pain, God is speaking to me. And so discerning the Spirit's voice when there's deep pain requires cultivating space in
mm,
my soul, which then, as I practice this, as I began to lean in, and as I grow, even in just a release, like I can be here and I can trust you, God. That creates more space for me to hold others' pain and sorrow.
mm,
And so it's that work that I need to do first within, that I don't have to fix it, that I can be with.
mm,
Because if God is with me in my
mhm,
pain and sorrow, then I can trust that He is with another. And I think as a director, a spiritual director, I hear so many just heartbreaking stories, so much pain. And I'm not a therapist, so it's not my job to have wise words, which I love this space, even though it's hard when I can't help someone. And I don't have anything um, snappy to give to them as a tip to help them get out of it. But it is just being with, as God is with us. And I think these undoing spaces um, are the dark spaces, those dark nights of the soul that many have referred to um,
mhm,
about their faith, where there are no more answers. And I can't, what I used to, how I used to think myself through something doesn't work anymore. And then, if that's so, that's scary.
mhm,
Can my faith hold up in this space? Is God still real? Am I losing my mind? And what if people knew? That's the worst question. As an
mhm,
as an Asian, not wanting to fail and not wanting to
mhm.
do it wrong. That's
Yes.
an extra, like that. Pull myself up, just try harder in my faith. And I think more of us have encountered those dark spaces really by ourselves, and I don't think we were made to do that alone.
Yes. So let's, if I can ask for a little clarification or compare and
Yeah.
contrast. You mentioned about this darkness and this undoing. There's also some words we use like depression
Hmm.
versus dark night of the soul versus
Hmm.
deconstruction. How
Yeah.
are those similar or different?
Yeah. We don't have all day, and I'm definitely not an expert in this. So I'll just, from my understanding, I
Mm-hmm.
think deconstruction, in my simplest understanding, I think it is just this taking apart, to understand, and just to, it's not just throwing everything out, but it's this,
Mm-hmm.
let's just see what my faith is made up of, right? In my way of, if I were talking about deconstructing, it wouldn't seem scary to me. It has seemed to become a scary phenomenon across the evangelical world. But I think in my own little, my kids played with Legos, it doesn't, we
Mm-hmm.
can just deconstruct what we made. Let's just see what we've made. And then we might need to build it back up again, because
Mm-hmm.
maybe that foundation wasn't so strong. So that's my very
Mm-hmm.
simplistic understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we talk about depression, I think, while not being a professional, I think in my own understanding, having gone through my own season, um, I think, yeah, there's internal crisis, external crisis that can
Yeah.
trigger something. But
Mm-hmm.
I think we need help. I think when I was going through it, we had just landed in East Asia, where we lived for 24 years, and had no words for what I felt. And I needed help. I really needed help, but was so scared to let people know. Here I am, like, I've given my life to cross cultural ministry, and I can't get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's real. And I needed people around me, and I needed to be honest. And that's a whole nother story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Um, so the dark night of the soul, I think, is it can feel like depression. I think it can, having gone through also a season of this where it just feels really dark and I can't. I mean, and in my those seasons of my life, um, yeah, I've had various moments, but I think um, I learned that in the darkness, you learn to adjust your eyes. And even
Mm,
if we were out in the darkest night at camping, um, that our eyes learn to adjust and we learn to see differently.
mm, mm,
So um, I think all three of these spaces require waiting,
mhm,
and they're not places where we can have quick, zappy, canned answers for any of it.
mhm. Yeah,
The
thank you.
mystery of how, yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love your Lego illustration. Sometimes those who get into that place of doubt, questions, and take deconstructing as throwing the Legos out rather than taking it apart and taking a closer look
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
rethinking rather than throwing it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Dark Night Soul, again, but neither of us are clinicians. And so there is a
Yes.
category for clinical depression that requires
Yes.
medical attention. But
Yes.
perhaps Dark Night of Soul is something where you just have a spiritual dryness or
Mm-hmm.
absence of God. I've heard that in spiritual
Mm-hmm.
formation
Yes.
language,
Yeah.
but you're still functional. So
Yes.
it hasn't
Yes.
affected your mental and emotional state, but it's very much affecting your spiritual state.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, DJ. Absolutely.
Maybe that's a good distinction. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
um, well, if I may, I'll just share with you the moment of undoing
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Please.
most immediately follows the chronology of my story. So I went through seminary, took 4.5 years. I pastored for 5 years, two
Mm-hmm.
years as a youth pastor in a traditional Chinese church with Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, and then 3 years in a multi-ethnic Asian American um, church plant with young adults, and I was associate
Mm-hmm.
pastor. And then after 10 years, I realized I could be an okay pastor, but what good was an okay
Mm-hmm.
pastor? If through some circumstances I was no longer a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was such an undoing because I spent 10 years trying to be a pastor,
Yeah.
trying to
Can
do
only
this
imagine.
work, and now
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. And so that crushed me. And I was
No doubt.
diagnosed bipolar because I
Mm.
could no longer function. I couldn't make sense of my life.
Mm.
And it took over a year to get kind of back on my feet and have some sense of
Mhm.
normalcy. But it's been a recovery for
Mhm.
several years after that.
Mm.
I think that's undoing, right?
Yeah. That is undoing of the deepest and hardest. Yeah. Did you were there people around you that knew what was going on?
Very few, because I'm Chinese American and I was in a
Yeah.
predominantly Asian American church. Um,
Yeah.
I was out of touch with my feelings. So that was also
Mm.
discovering that I had
Mhm.
so much unprocessed feeling, being
Mm.
so committed to duty and responsibility. And
Yeah.
supposedly, I'm high functioning to use mental health
Mm.
language,
Mhm.
but having so much unprocessed feeling caught up to me.
Yeah.
And I was able to kind of keep my emotional sadness bottled up inside throughout high
Hmm.
school and college and even young adult as a pastor.
Yeah.
I couldn't hold it anymore, and I was undone. But God was gracious, of course, but that's for the next episode.
Yeah. Let's even just sitting in that.
Mhm,
I was undone. What a scary place to
mm,
be.
mhm.
And we don't have a lot of guides
No, I
in
was
those
alone.
moments to let us know. Yeah.
I was afraid to get counseling because of shame-based culture.
Yeah.
My wife didn't understand me because she's got her own reaction because she thought she married a pastor. What am I doing?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So there's the vocational crisis, the personal crisis of overwhelming feeling, and then very much being alone. I had a therapist, so I was grateful for that.
Hmm.
So my lifeline became my therapist, who was also a psychiatrist, so he could dispense medication.
Hmm.
He used a lot of movie metaphors to try to inspire me. So
Was that
25
helpful?
years ago, 25 years ago, I mean, they didn't understand bipolar very much at all, so they did the
Mm.
best they could. But um, but what's interesting lately, I was looking at some of the new modalities in therapy. There's one called
Hmm.
existential therapy,
Mm.
which sounds very close to a spiritual crisis. You know, because
Yeah.
existential
Oh,
is
yeah.
such a
That's,
core
yes.
of who we are. And
Yeah.
so I think, in God's timing, He's bringing everything together and into the light.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I can't help but think, as I listen to you just even share this little bit of your story, DJ, of just how grief and pain play into our undoing.
Mm,
So earlier I talked about just in our shaping years, um, we learned about pain and what to do with it. We learned from the key figures in our life. Here's how you deal
mm,
with pain. And in Chinese culture, we just don't think about it. We
mhm.
just put it
Yeah,
away, lock it up
and
in a box, and put it in the cellar.
we even have language that say
Absolutely.
swallow our bitterness or eat our
Absolutely.
bitterness. 吃苦.
Absolutely. Yep. Don't think about it. 别想, and then 吃苦. Just
Huh.
eat it and somewhat be a martyr in that, that's
Mm,
good strength there.
mm,
And as I think about mental health, even just now, what we're seeing among just Asian elderly, um, I think, oh, the pain, oh, the sorrow, oh, the anger, that we've not been taught what to do with anger, and um, even rage. What do we do with that? And that being a Christian, like we just don't do that. We just don't do anger. We don't do big emotions like that. So we got the joy of the Lord, and
mm,
we can push our way through, and it
mm,
catches up. And I think in
mhm,
this season or stage of undoing, it's really where we have to face all the monsters. We kind of have to be really honest. And it grieves me listening to your story. And I think it happens over and over and over again. I think about people in ministry and then just normal churchgoers, what we do with our pain, what would it be like if you had even a spiritual director just to sit and listen
mm,
to you talk about all of that? Not in a therapy session, but just as another trusted companion to listen to what you thought about God and where you were. And I think as remind we remind one another of who we are just by being with each other. I think
mm,
we can mirror back our belovedness if we can learn to cultivate those spaces of honesty so that we don't feel isolated. And I think it's probably the enemy's, one of his great tactics is to just cut us off from one another.
Yes.
And I think as a collective people, we value one another. So how much more as fellow believers should we not lean on one another, especially in these moments?
Yeah.
Not just when things are going well.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me in this conversation and revisiting how God's worked in my life.
Thanks
And
for sharing, DJ.
I'm receiving the additional light of grace through all of that. So I find it healing to talk with you. So thank you for guiding this with me.
Thanks for showing up.
And I'll look forward to the next 2 weeks as we continue this journey through how God's worked in my life and through your direction. Thank you, Jen. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, DJ.
Thank you for listening to the Erasing Shame podcast. Check out the show notes at erasingshame.com and subscribe to our email for updates. We would love to hear from you, so please add your comments at our website or on social. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, and you can also subscribe on YouTube or follow on Facebook. Please add a rating and review so we can reach more people with our message of health, hope, and compassion. This podcast is the digital outreach of Christian Asian Mental Health.